Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neal Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Last week, I put on my tournament director hat. This week, I'm putting on my player hat, and I'm going to discuss some important lessons that I've learned from playing in club-level tournaments over many, many years. There's 10 main themes I'm going to discuss with some sub-themes for each one. You're always learning from tournaments, so down the road, I'll likely have a follow-up episode, a lessons learned part 2, so to speak. A lot of these have to do with practical matters, chess psychology, and how to handle tournament conditions, which is a problem for many players. Many club players have a good theoretical and tactical background, but they have trouble with tournament conditions. So here we go. Let's jump right in. The first thing I've learned is that the fatigue factor is real. How tired you are, or conversely, how energetic you are, is absolutely going to affect your game. The person who didn't study chess much that week, but the night before his game got a really good night's sleep and is relaxed, didn't really have a crazy day at work, that person's going to perform much better than the person who studied all week and spent a lot of time on chess, but didn't get a lot of sleep the night before and had a horrible day at work and is stressed out. So that's the thing with tournament conditions that a lot of people don't talk about enough. We always talk about your chess skill and your chess knowledge and what are the weaknesses in your game. But the reality is you have to be prepared for tournament conditions, which means if you're really tired and fatigued, that is going to affect your game regardless of how much you did or didn't study that week. A few examples from the club, just things I've heard from some of the guys. We have one player, he comes to the club occasionally, once in a blue moon, but I just remember this conversation very vividly. He was talking to a friend of his about a game he was going to play at another club, another game he had coming up later in the week. And his friend was like, "Oh yeah, how do you think you're going to do against, whoever it was?" And his response was, "It's going to depend on what kind of day I had at work," right? Which is very, very true. And then someone else I was speaking with was saying that, if he has a disagreement with his wife, let's say, before he comes to the club, that's going to affect his game. And that's one of the realities I learned, that the type of day you had and your stress level and your general fatigue level, the type of sleep you got, that is very real, and that absolutely affects your game. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize, or they don't think about enough, or they take it for granted. They're like, "I don't understand why I played so poorly. I studied so much this week." Yeah, but were you tired? Were you stressed out? Were you distracted? And one thing I'll say during the game, sort of something that can maybe help this a little bit, because obviously we're all going to be tired to a certain degree, right? If we were to only play, let's say, when we feel 100%, we would pretty much never play, right? Because there's always something. If you're playing a game and you're really not feeling it, if you're feeling tired, or if you're feeling very impulsive, because that's one thing that happens when you're tired, you just sort of whip out moves thoughtlessly. If you feel like you're losing your connection to the position, if you just feel stuck, just get away from the board. Get up, walk away for a few minutes, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, just walk out of the hall for a minute, walk around the tournament hall if you want to stay in the room, even for just a few minutes. Don't worry about losing time on your clock. I'm not saying you should leave for like 15 minutes, but even if it's just for a minute or two, you'll come back to the board and then you'll look at it with fresh eyes, and then you'll see things that you missed. You might even see an obvious threat that your opponent's last move made that you missed initially. And I will say this, the advice that you should always stay at the board, because that's out there, right? Stay at the board, don't get up, always focus on the board. That makes no sense. If you're staying at the board and you're staring at the position and you're feeling tired and you're not identifying with the position, why would you stay at the board? That makes no sense. Like, how's that working out for you, right? You can't find the right move. You don't know what to do, but you heard that, you should stay at the board. Well, obviously, if it's not working, it doesn't make sense, right? That's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over, but expecting a different result. So if you're staying at the board because you think that's what you're supposed to do because somebody told you to do that, but you're not feeling it, you have to accept, that it's not working for you and just get up. And for me, that's one of the most effective things you can do. I mean, just the other night, I was playing a game. He was high 1700s player. We ended up drawing. Basically, long story short, I had a little bit of an advantage in the end game. I had a beautifully placed knight. He had a weaker pawn structure, but it was very grindy. I had the advantage, but it's the kind of thing you really have to grind out. I only had 4 minutes on my clock. He had about the same. He ended up offering a draw, and I took it just because I knew that wasn't going to be enough time for me to calculate. I didn't want to risk, even with the delay, losing the game because it was very, very tricky. Another night I might have played on, but I'll speak about draw offers and that whole thing in a separate episode. That's going to be coming up. Just a little teaser there. But anyhow, here's the point of that story. There was one position where I was pretty sure he blundered and I had a tactic, and I almost was about to play it, but I said, you know what? I just want to double check myself. So what I do when I want to double check a blunder, I actually get up from the board because you kind of want to step away from that lane that you're in, so to speak, and look at it from a fresh lane. So I got up just for a moment because I was in time pressure. Just for maybe 15, 20 seconds, I went back and then I realized this move that I thought was going to be a winning move, it turned out to be a blunder. It didn't work. It was one of those tactics where initially it looks like it's going to work, but I realized that his initial response then counterattacked something. I didn't see it the first time. But if I didn't get up and take my time, if I had stayed at the board, I easily could have played this and then I would have lost the game because I would have been down a piece. So something to think about there. If you're feeling tired, if you're not identifying with a position, the advice which is out there in the chess discourse to sort of, stay at the board, never get up from the board, I think that is silly. I think that's ridiculous. I think getting up from the board and coming back fresh is one of the best things you can do, especially when you're really tired and you start to feel that brain fog. The next lesson I've learned from playing in tournaments, and this is a big theme with me that longtime listeners are familiar with, you don't want to force things. The whole idea of waiting for a mistake works really well at the club level, sort of letting your opponent lose the game rather than you trying to force the win. Let your opponent lose the game for you, meaning let your opponent make the mistake and then you win the game. And a couple of thoughts about there. Let's unpack that a little bit. In club level tournaments, most tactics that you will execute in the game are going to be very basic 1 to 2 move tactics. And I'm saying this not only as a player, but as a TD who's witnessed countless amateur games. If you notice, whenever someone blunders at the amateur level, it's usually fairly obvious. Even higher rated club players like 17, 18, 1900, when they blunder and then you have a winning tactic, it's usually a pretty basic 1 to 2, maybe 3 move tactic. And a lot of these 5 to 8 move sequences, like these really complicated sort of puzzle tactics that you would do on the computer or in a book, something like that, you're generally not going to see those as much at the club level, right? So most tactics that you execute on the board that will win you the game, it's generally a basic tactical shot. Second thing is, when you're analyzing, the tactical sequence that you think you see often doesn't work, and then you waste a lot of time on your clock, and then you're more likely to run into time pressure later on. Or you do play that move, realize it's a blunder, and then lose the game. So if you don't see the tactic clearly right away, or after just a couple of minutes, don't play it and move on, because then what's going to happen is you're going to waste all this time on your clock to realize the tactic doesn't work. Because let's say you see this quote unquote tactic, you think it's winning, right? You spend 5-6 minutes on your clock looking at it, which if you're doing a game 60 or game 90 is a lot of time, and then you realize it doesn't work, well, now you just wasted 6 or 7 minutes for nothing. So in those quicker club time controls, you sort of have to say, all right, if I don't see this tactic within a reasonable amount of time, I'm just going to walk away. And guess what? If it turns out it was correct, oh well. Because if you sort of force it and blunder, so something to think about, there's that famous saying, DAUT, doubt, don't analyze unnecessary tactics. I think that's from Secrets of Modern Chess Strategy, I think. Don't hold me to that. But he has this saying in there called doubt. Again, DAUT, don't analyze unnecessary tactics. And that's sort of what that stems from. So if you think you see a tactical sequence, but it's a bit complicated and you have to analyze, if you don't see that within a reasonable amount of time, you need to move on. Okay, you can't spend like 15 minutes or 12 minutes in a game 90 looking at this possible tactic. You know, you do have to factor in the clock. So that's something that I've learned as well, where you spend too much time analyzing a tactic that doesn't exist. The next thing I've learned, or really developed, I should say, and this is something that I really came to terms with recently, is I'm much better at handling losses and taking it in stride. It used to be pretty bad. I used to have trouble losing, and I'm not proud of that. You know, I would often just show it physically after the game. I didn't always take losing well, and that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. It's not a good place to be. I would obsess about it for days. And when I say that, I know many of you have done the same thing. I know that that's not sort of an anomaly. I know that many, many people have trouble handling losses, but one of the things I've learned is that you need to get over that. You just need to deal with it. It's part of the game. I'm going to talk a little bit more about losses later on in this discussion. It's one of my other bullet points, but I will say now that one of the things I've learned is I have become much better at handling losses, and it's at a point where beating yourself up, it's just not going to do any good. Now, yes, as I've said before, you need to be upset when you lose. It has to bother you, or you're not going to get better. If you have this sort of like, oh, shucks, every time you lose, oh, well, I lost, no big deal. No, you don't want to do that, because then you're not going to get motivated to get better. But what I'm saying is, as far as how it affects you emotionally, you just need to learn to deal with it and accept it. So if I lose now, I just shake my opponent's hand, good game, and that's it. And I walk away, and that's how it is. But I had trouble processing that in the past, which I'm not proud of, but recently I've been much better at that. And I guess for me, you know, everyone's different. I guess it just took me a long time to kind of develop that, where I would just take losses way too seriously. So that's definitely something that I've learned, and some growth that I've had in that regard. I've also learned quite a few things about higher rated players. Couple of things to break down there. First, natural ability plays a much larger role in chess success than it's given credit for, and I think it's often downplayed. I think natural ability is a bigger deal than it's made out to be. I truly believe that some just naturally possess strong chess skills, and or they develop these skills significantly more quickly than the average player. Some also adapt to tournament conditions very quickly, which is also a very big deal. For example, for me personally, I remember these days, it took me a long time to get used to, again, just tournament conditions, getting used to the clock and using a chess clock, getting used to keeping score, getting used to touch move, getting used to just playing in a tournament with other people playing as well, and having people look at your board, getting used to nerves and touch move, all these different things. That took me a long time, and I lost a lot of games early in my chess career just because I just couldn't handle the environment. I guess it was all too much to take in, whereas other players adapt to that very quickly. So natural ability is a thing. That is legit. I don't downplay that the way that some people do. And again, that's not me sort of like whining and, oh, you know, these guys who they play in one tournament, they're already 1,800. No, that's fine. That's how it is. Again, I'm going to argue that natural ability is absolutely a thing, and it is going to affect some people more than others. Some people are just going to have a knack to develop skills and become a strong player quicker than others, even if they're studying the same. You could have two players who are playing the same amount, who are studying the same amount, whose general intelligence is about the same, but one player's ability and chess rating is going to skyrocket just because of that natural ability that the other player doesn't have. I mean, that's just how it is, and that's something that I've learned and have accepted. The other thing regarding higher rated players is that all amateur players, and this is something that Jeremy Silman has said and others have said, all amateur players, including strong players, are capable of playing very poorly on any given night. So keep that in mind. Upsets are very common at the club level. They're not sort of a one-off type of thing. 1,400 players will draw or beat 2,000 players all the time. 1,600 players will sometimes draw a master. It happens. An expert will lose even to a 1,300 player. These happen all the time because, again, regardless of your level, anyone is capable of playing very poorly on any given night. And conversely, anyone is also capable of playing a phenomenal game, right? Everyone at any time could have the game of their career, and you could be the victim of that. That's just how it is. You could be 1,800 and face a 1,350 player who is just bringing his A game. He's just having the game of his career. Or maybe you walked right into his prep. There's a lot of factors that we can break down. But the point is, all amateur players are capable of playing very poorly or very strongly on any given night. And rating is really a range. So if someone's rated 1,500, that's their average rating. Assuming that that's legit, that we're not talking about like rating deflation, assuming that that 1,500 rating is an established rating, that 1,500 player could play like a 2,000 player on one night and then could play like a 1,200 player on another night. That's just how it is. That's the human factor. Next thing, I've learned that the rating system is cruel. It is cruel, baby. It is very easy to lose points, but it's very difficult to gain them. And the rating system is also very punitive when losing to lower rated opponents. If you're the victim of an upset, losing 25 to 30 points for that one game doesn't seem right. That does not seem right. And that's a major factor that's causing rating deflation, where you have this anomalous loss to a lower rated opponent and you get hammered as far as your rating. The other thing, higher rated players will generally not accept a draw offer from a lower rated opponent, which makes gaining rating points even tougher. So be prepared to play for the win. Now, to be fair, I'm sort of complaining about something that I do myself because I won't accept draws from lower rated opponents either. But of course, when it happens to me, I get frustrated, right? That's the human nature at work. But it's really frustrating because you'll play someone 300-400 points higher. The position's dead drawn, it's even, but they won't take the draw because they don't want to lose the rating points, and they just believe that because you're lower rated, you're going to blunder. But I do the same thing myself. I guess that's just how it is. But the reason I mention that is it makes it even harder to get rating points because against a high rated player, they're going to make you play for the win. They're generally not going to accept the draw against you unless they're either not feeling well or they feel that you're completely winning. I mean, if a high rated player accepts your draw or even offers you a draw, that's generally because he thinks he's going to lose. All right. But it's just very tough because you would think, oh, okay, my opponent's much higher rated. I managed to get into this dead drawn endgame. He'll accept the draw from me and I'll get some rating points. But it doesn't work that way. They're going to play it out with the belief that you're going to make a mistake. So they won't accept your draw, which makes it even harder to gain rating points. The other thing, I am no longer playing over the board Blitz games. I haven't done it in quite some time, but it's something I'm never going to go back to. I'm not talking about online Blitz, but over the board Blitz games, I'm done with. even though it's a separate rating, for those of you who may not know, your quick rating is separate from your classical rating. So your classical rating is not at stake when you play in these quick tournaments, but I just can't stand playing over the board Blitz. It's just too nerve-wracking for my taste. And there's something about losing at Blitz that's particularly infuriating, even worse than losing at a classical game. I don't know what it is, because you're going back and forth, and then you make this one mistake, and it's just, I don't know. I'm done playing over the board Blitz games. That's something else that I've learned, or that I've decided after playing at the club level over the board for many, many years. We're now going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with more lessons that I've learned from playing in tournaments right after these messages. All right, the next thing, an observation. Players hate facing fianchetto structures. I've noticed that. They freak out. So openings like the Catalon, the Nimzo Indian with B6, or the Queen's Indian, even the King's Indian, are very good opening choices if you play those openings. Now, the King's Indian, of all the ones I mentioned, the King's Indian can be a little tricky. That's very theoretical. There's a lot you have to know. But one thing I've noticed is that whenever I do have a fianchettoed bishop, my opponent is very, very uncomfortable. And a lot of times they don't know what to do, or they try to trade it. They try to fianchetto their bishop on the diagonal, but a lot of times they're not sure how to do it, or they'll make a mistake or blunder in the process. But that's just a little sort of nuance that I've noticed. So if you play an opening that does have a fianchettoed bishop, that can often be an advantage, because I've noticed for players rated below 1800, it really does throw them off, makes them very, very uncomfortable. And I know the Catalan opening especially, if the player with the black pieces is not familiar with that and has never faced it before, you can really crush them with that. Catalan is very, very effective at the club level. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Catalan is, basically that's where you play D4. It's a D4 opening as white, and then you play C4, but then you do a quick G3, right? You fianchetto your King's Bishop pretty quickly, right? So it's D4, C4 combined with G3 and Bishop G2. That's the idea behind the Catalan opening. So, just something to think about there. Like I said, it's a little bit of nuance. So if you have a fianchettoed bishop, it often really throws your opponent off. I've noticed that. Next thing, and this is a big one, most amateur players do not have strong endgame skills, especially in this day and age where everything is tactics and puzzle rush and speed chess. So if your endgame skills are good, if you feel your endgame skills are above average or even better than that, and you can safely steer the game in that direction, you will often negate all the tactical skill of your opponent, and he may crack when he has to think more positionally and thematically. It's kind of like in poker, like this is what it makes me think of. It's kind of like in poker, if you're playing a really, really strong player, a good move is to go all in against them, because you're taking away all of their post-flop skills, right? If you go all in poker, basically the opponent has no choice. He either has to decide if he's going to play for his whole stack or not. You're taking away all of his skills, right? And that's the idea with going into the end game. So if you're playing one of these internet guys or one of the newer players from the chess boom and everything is tactics and they just want to attack and mate, well, if you trade off the heavy pieces and go into an end game and they have to think more subtly, more positionally, they may not know what to do, and they may tend to also play impatiently, and you can easily win. So just something to keep in mind. Most amateur players do not have strong endgame skills. The next thing I've learned is that opening theory is not as important as opening principles, because many players will often go off book early. Now, let me just get some definitions here. When we say opening theory, that basically means like memorized moves, right? The theory. Well, if you do this and your opponent does that, you then have to play this, then he plays this, that type of thing. Now, generally, I'm making some very just general statements here. A lot of the E4, E5 openings, the symmetrical openings, which I'm not a fan of, those tend to be very theoretical, very move order dependent. In a lot of those openings, I mean, there's positions where basically if you don't play one specific move, you're already losing. Okay. But here's my point. Usually at the club level, things go off book pretty early. And that's why I say that opening principles are more important. And when I say opening principles, basically themes and ideas about controlling the center, developing your pieces, castling, having your pieces develop in harmony with a specific purpose, that whole thing, not moving the same piece twice in the opening, although, that one tends to be overblown because sometimes moving the same piece twice is correct. But you get the idea. The reason is if you understand the principles, then the theory doesn't become as important, because then you'll be able to analyze the position in its own right, even if it's something you've never seen before. Whereas if it's just theory, if you just memorize theory and memorize lines, well, if one of the lines you didn't memorize is not played, what do you do? And that's where the principles come in. So opening principles are definitely more important than opening theory. What matters, and this is the whole point of the opening, you want to get a playable middle game. Because many people forget that. They think the idea of the opening is just to develop your pieces. The purpose of the opening is to get a playable middle game. And I do believe that opening principles is going to help you more than opening theory. Now, yes, even for system openings, even for something like the London system, there is some theory, right? I mean, even system openings have some theory. But what I'm saying is you don't want to spend all your time just on memorizing specific lines without understanding why those moves are being played. You need to understand the themes and ideas and the principles, because then you'll be able to negotiate openings where your opponent goes off book early, which again at the club level is going to happen quite often. Now I have two more main points that I don't feel are discussed enough in the discourse. They're discussed and they're mentioned, but I don't feel that they're mentioned enough, and I don't feel that players realize how important these are. So the first is that you have to learn how to play from a worse position. Specifically, you have to steal draws and even wins from a worse position if you want to increase your rating. You have to. This is one of the major differences between stronger and weaker players. The stronger players don't give up and throw in the towel, and don't be naive and think, oh, well, okay, from now on, I'm never going to get into a worse position. It's not going to happen. Okay. Doesn't matter if you're rated 1,000 or 1,500 or 1,800 or 2,200 or even 2,800. It's going to happen. There could be a number of reasons. You are going to be in positions where you're worse, and fighting back from those worse positions is a skill you have to develop if you want to become a competent tournament player. It's so important. You have to steal some draws and even wins from those positions. That is a major, major factor that separates higher rated players from lower ones. They will find a way. And the last thing, I'm going to end with this. Very important. This may seem simple, almost trite, but again, I don't think it's talked about enough. You have to accept that you're not going to win every game. Now, of course, we want to minimize the losses. We don't want to lose most of our games, but you are going to lose games. Again, we want to minimize those losses. That's the goal. But you have to accept that you're not going to win every game. And if you do that, that's going to keep you grounded. Now, one of the things that I've done that I continue to do that helps me with this, and this also helps with dealing with losses that I mentioned earlier, which was a problem for me, I go by the overall tournament result. And this works very well. I don't go by individual games. So if it's, let's say, a 5-round tournament, right? Typical club event. Let's say it's 5 rounds, 5 weeks. I'm not going to worry about one stinker of a game I've had, or even 2. I go by the total result. So if the tournament ends and I gain some rating points, that was a successful outing in my mind. That's what I go by. Even if I only gained 6 points. I mean, that's not great, but it's something. But if I gained rating points, it was a successful tournament. And by looking at the big picture, I then forget about, that one horrible game that I had, or, maybe I got upset by a low-rated opponent. These things are going to happen. These things are going to happen. In the tournament we currently have now at the club, we're only in round 3, and already there have been some crazy upsets. I mean, that's just how it is. So again, you're not going to win every game, and try that trick of just think of the overall tournament result. After the entire tournament, not one individual game, did I gain some rating points? And even if it's just 5 or 6 points, that's still something. You could still say that was a successful tournament. And if you did have kind of a lousy tournament, but maybe a few games you played well, and let's say you lost 10 points when the tournament's over, that's not terrible. You cut your losses somewhat. Now, obviously, we want to avoid those tournaments where you lost like 30 or 40 points. That's brutal. I've been there. It's not fun, but that's how it goes sometimes. But again, look for the overall result. Accept the fact that you're not going to win every game, and just look at the big picture. And I really think that's going to keep you grounded. So again, these are 10 things that I've learned from playing in tournaments over the years. I will likely have a follow-up at some point, because playing in tournaments, there's always something to learn. There's always a lesson that you get. There's always another tip that you pick up. There's always something, every time you play in a tournament, you just learn more and more and more. You learn all these little tricks and all these little nuances that studying chess theory and doing tactical puzzles just aren't going to help you with. A lot of it really just comes from playing. So as always, I really appreciate you listening, appreciate your support of the show, and I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.